Welcome everyone to a Greenville County Library System virtual event. My name is Rachel and I'm the Adult Outreach and Event Coordinator for the library. And I'm so pleased you could join us for this event, Houseplants 101, presented by Greater Greenville Master Gardeners. If you're interested in our other live virtual events, please check out our website, greenvillelibrary.org, and select Adult Virtual Events under our Classes and Events button. See our full calendar of events. To check on-demand videos, classes, and activities, just select the Adults category under Virtual Classes and Activities. If you're interested in checking out gardening and sustainability books, make sure your library card is up to date and come visit us at any of our locations. We look forward to seeing you soon. Please join me in welcoming our presenter for today, Polly Powell, a master gardener.
Thank you, Rachel. Well, one of the things that before I started, I wanted to share with you was this reference. This has been my reference for houseplants. Can you see it? The Complete Houseplant Survival Manual by Barbara Pleasant. She has talked at a couple Master Gardener symposiums, and it's just a wealth of information. So, how many of you have plants in your house that look like this? Or like Maxine, you say, I've got a way with plants. It's a way where they turn brown and die, but it's a way. One of the things I remember when I took the Master Gardener class was Corey Tanner, who was the Extension Horticulture agent and the teacher of the class. He told us the very first day of class, plants die, get over it. So, too fast. I haven't forgotten what Corey. So the goal of the class or the presentation tonight is to share tips on how to grow healthy and vibrant houseplants. Before I do that, though, I want to talk a little bit about the history of houseplants. If you go back to about 1000 BC, the ancient Chinese grew plants that they used in their houses. It brought them back to nature, and that's why they used them in their houses. And they also practiced the ancient art of bonsai. Then if you move up in time a little bit to about 600 BC, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, were built. Now, from what I was reading, there is some discussion on whether or not this was really a true structure. But supposedly King Nebuchadnezzar built this for his wife. His wife was from Turkey, and when she married Nebuchadnezzar and moved to the Euphrates Valley, Mesopotamia, she missed the mountains and the plants of her homeland. So King Nebuchadnezzar built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon for her. Also, in ancient times, the Greeks, the Romans, and the Egyptians all had plants in their homes. Now, if you look at the picture on the right, this is a picture of a Roman courtyard, and you can see all the plants. Now, I couldn't find where they used the plants inside, but a lot of times these courtyards were in the center of the house, and so every room looked out on the courtyard. Then for a period of time, people grew plants for medicine and to feed their animals and to feed themselves. But as far as a history of houseplants, there was a long period of time where houseplants were not used, plants inside the house, until about the Renaissance is when they came back into being used in homes. During the medieval times, the monasteries used plants, but they mostly used them for medicine. And you'll notice from the pictures here that they grew the plants outside, and then when they brought them inside, they dried them. They were dried plants. They did grow herbs in the kitchen for cooking. There's a reason for this. Most of the homes or most of the buildings during the medieval times were drafty and dark, and houseplants just were not suited to be grown inside. Now, I want to ask you a question, and I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about it. What invention allowed plants to move from the outdoors to the indoors? Any ideas? I'll give you a hint. Look at these houses. What's missing from these houses? I hope you said the invention of glass. In the 1600s in Jamestown, they were doing glass blowing. And if you've ever visited Jamestown, you can go to the glass blowing facility up there. But you'll notice with pictures that the glass was not plate glass. It was blown in cylinders and really thick, and then cut off and put into windows. So even though, I'm going too fast, hitting my thing, wait a minute. So even though there was glass for the windows, it was not clear plate glass. That was another invention that came about during the industrial times. But even in the art in the 1600s, you can see in this picture or in this painting of a woman with a water jug where the glass is put into lead channels and used in windows. Now, windows were actually used in homes like during the Roman times, but they used animal hides, they used stone that they had shaved really, really thin, or shutters, but they didn't use plate glass. The French actually produced glass, and this is the orangery at Versailles. This is a 492-foot long place outside of Versailles, built on the side of Versailles, that lets light in. And what they did was they put all the citrus trees inside the orangery. You'll notice here on this picture on the right, though, that it's not really big sections of glass. It's little tiny sections of glass. Then during the industrial age, we invented a way to make plate glass. So this is the Palm House in Kew, England. And it's actually a greenhouse. It was one of the first greenhouses that used wrought iron in the construction of it. It was built by Roger Turner. Hang on just a minute. It was built by Richard Turner in 1844. An interesting thing about this, as I was doing research, was they actually used the blueprints from shipbuilding. So if you look at the Palm House from above, it looks like a ship that's been turned upside down. So then during the middle 1800s up to the 1900s, we had Victorians who used plants inside their house. These particular cases are like terrariums. They're called Wardian cases, and only the wealthy people used this type of case. It was to bring the things like the greenhouses, the big Q houses, into the parlors so that they could be used. But the Victorians also used, put plants inside their fireplaces during the summer to cover up the soot. They hung plants where bright lights, where they could, in the bright lights, and use these cases. Some Victorian houses also had large greenhouses or conservatories that they used, but it was mostly a wealthy practice. And then during World War II, there was not much of a use for houseplants. And if you've noticed, the use of houseplants kind of cycles. It goes to a low ebb and then it comes back into favor. Well, during the 60s and 70s, during the flower power generation, houseplants came into vogue again, and they were used in dorm rooms and in sparsely furnished apartments. And they were in use so much that they actually looked like a jungle. It actually looked like a jungle. So, but then when the people of the 60s and 70s just became interested in their careers and raising families and taking care of the yard, houseplants went out of favor. And they've just recently come back in with a vengeance. So, and if you think about it, who was a member of the flower power generation? All of us baby boomers who are now reaching retirement age. There's a reason that houseplants have come back into vogue. Now, the next 4 slides that I'm going to show you are infographics. The information comes from an infograph from the National Initiative of Consumer Horticulture, NICH, and they can be found on consumerhort.org. So we found that there are lots of benefits for having plants inside the house or wherever we live. One of the biggest things is that it improves the air quality. NASA did a study back in 1989 where they took houseplants and they tested to see what kind of particles that they removed from the environment of a home. Formaldehyde, benzene, all of these are in our upholstered items, rugs, things like that in our home. And they're not very good for us. So there were about 15 plants that NASA tested, and they did find that it did improve the air quality by removing some of these harmful compounds in the air. Plants also stimulate the psychological and physiological relaxation response. It increases the humidity in the house. They supply beneficial bacteria and increase the microbial diversity, and they psychologically link us to nature. So they make us feel that we're outside. And now with this COVID thing going on, they found that it's getting out in nature is much more beneficial than staying at home. In places where we work, they have done some experiments and they found that they provide plants help the productivity of the workspace. One of the experiments was in an office building, 5-story office building. On 4 floors, they put plants. On the other floor, there were no plants. And what they found was all of these other things down here that occurred. But productivity did increase on the 4 floors where there were plants. your faster reaction times on a computer. It enhances your motivation. It increases job satisfaction, improves your mood. And this I thought was very important. It lowers your blood pressure and reduces stress and tension. And you can focus more on the task at hand. They reduce sick leave and eye strain. They make you feel more comfortable, productive, healthier, and creative. And if you think about plants and people going to the hospital, what's the first thing that we usually do? The first thing that we usually do is send them a plant. Well, that's great because they found out that hospital rooms with plants in them, the patients have less recovery time and don't spend as long in the hospital. Again, it reduces stress and blood pressure. The patient's more relaxed and aware, and it makes pain more tolerable so that they require less pain medication. If you've been in the hospital, you know how tired you get of lying in bed. Well, supposedly plants in the room create less fatigue. It also improves the room by removing pollutants and chemicals, and promotes a feeling of warmth and caring from the staff. In the schoolroom, and since I was a former teacher, I always had plants in my classroom because, again, they removed the pollutants from the classroom. If you think about having 30 students in a classroom and everybody's breathing out carbon dioxide, well, the carbon dioxide level increases and students get less alert because they're not getting enough oxygen. So plants in the classroom improve the oxygen level. And because they're more alert, they learn better. They're calmer and more relaxed. Misbehavior is decreased, and that's a great thing for teachers. Student absences decrease. I always allowed the students to take care of the plants, and it gave them a sense of responsibility when that happened. They seem to have a more positive attitude and be more satisfied with schools. So this is the why of why we have plants inside. Now, if you're planning to grow plants inside your house, success is very, very simple. But there are two requirements. You have to understand the environment that the plants need to flourish, and you have to have respect for the plant's talents and limitations. You need to know the plant that you're trying to grow on a personal level. It's almost as if they were your child. And if you have children, you know that each child has basic needs that has to be met in order for them to be successful. Well, the same thing is true with houseplants. So we're going to use an acronym that we use with junior master gardeners, and it's PLANTS. Each of these things has to do, if you know about these things, you'll do well with your plants. The P stands for place. The L stands for light. A, air. N, nutrients. T, this is kind of a curveball. It didn't fit, so we made it fit. T is thirsty, or stands for water. And S stands for soil. So we're going to take each one of these letters and we're going to talk about it a little bit to see how it affects houseplants. When we talk about place, in a home, most of the time, plants are on flat surfaces, like the floor, the table, a bookcase, or a windowsill. So the P in this case stands for location. When we have plants inside, it helps us establish a green link to the outside world. So there's some hints about where to place your plants. If you have a small plant, they look best when viewed from above. So the best place to put them is on a tabletop. If you have a cascading plant, like a vine, then you need to put them high. You can either hang them in the window or you can place them on a mantle. Place them on a mantle or a china cabinet or a taller piece of furniture. And if you have a tall vertical plant, like this one right here, which is probably in the wrong place, this one should be placed on the floor because it tends to anchor a piece of furniture or provide interest in a bare space. Place also can stand for containers. And as this shelf shows, the variety is endless. So when you normally buy a plant that you're going to keep in the house, it's in a black plastic pot, nursery pot. And there's several reasons for this. They're lightweight, they hold moisture, they seldom break during shipping, and they're easier to ship. But when you start investing in a pot, a flower pot, you can spend lots of money. You want to make sure that the container that you choose meets the needs of your plant. And if how the plant looks to you is important, then you need to choose the container first and then put the plant in the container. The size of the plant of the container should be proportional to the plant. And a general rule of thumb is to measure the height of the plant from the soil line to the highest point, and then divide it by 3. That gives you the approximate width, diameter of the pot you need to buy for that plant. You want to choose the smallest container that will hold the roots of the plant. And there's 2 reasons for this. Small containers will have a dwarfing effect on plants. And soil that's not used by the plant roots tends to hold water, excess moisture. And this provides an environment for fungi and will cause root rot. Now, if you choose terracotta pots or just the regular old clay pots, one of the things you need to pay attention to is that they dry out much quicker than ceramic pots. So they should be used for plants that like periods of dryness between watering. If you still want to use the terracotta pot and the plant needs to be watered more often, what you can do is paint the inside with latex paint or paint it with wax, and that will keep the terracotta pot from drying out. Plastic pots are good if the plant needs consistent dampness because they tend to hold moisture. And then your glazed ceramic pots or fiberglass pots, those are the pots that you need to use in formal settings, or if the pot is a work of art, it's an interesting piece. All right, you don't have to use a flower pot for your plants. You can be as creative as you want. The only thing is you need to think about the drainage, how the water is going to get out of whatever container you're going to use. This Tonka truck is interesting to me because I had boys and we had lots of Tonka trucks. Here are some more pictures of creative containers for plants. When I went to the International Master Gardener Conference in Portland, we viewed a garden up there, and you know Portland is weird. That's their saying. But one of the gardens that we viewed, the lady had high heels all over the place with plants in the garden. So, and if you like rustic, this also works. However, I have tried this, and unless this area where you put the plants in is deep enough, there's not enough soil for the roots. And this is really planted with lots of plants. Place also can mean shade or sun. And there are generally three low light or forms of light: low light, medium light, high light. This high light would be out in the sun. That would be tropical plants. Low light would be plants that you put in the shade. Medium light would get some sun and some shade. But you need to know what the plant that you're working with needs, what kind of light it needs. Which brings us to L. L is for light. Light is a plant's most critical need. Even if you have the moisture and the nutrients for a plant, if the plant can't get light, then the other two things don't make any difference. And each plant differs in their light requirements. And you must know what those light requirements are. You're going to get tired of me saying, know what your plant needs. But in order to be successful, that's what you have to do. I'm going to explain a little bit. In a plant's leaves, you have structures that are called chloroplasts. These chloroplasts are like solar collectors. And what they do is the leaf turns toward the sun or turns toward the light, and the chloroplast collects the energy from the sunlight or from the light source and stores it so that the leaves can carry on photosynthesis. If a leaf is very thick, you have several layers of chloroplast that are all lined up. If it's thin, you generally only have one layer of chloroplast. So if your plants need low light, then they're going to have that single layer or that thin layer of chloroplast. Inside that chloroplast is a compound called chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is what absorbs the light. Now I'm going to take you back to 6th grade, because one of the 6th grade science standards is photosynthesis. Plants make their own food. And the way they do that is they take nutrients and water from the soil, send it up to the leaf. The leaf absorbs carbon dioxide and light, and a chemical reaction occurs to make sugar. This is the formula down here on the bottom. The sugar compound is either stored in the leaf or it's sent to another place like the stem or the root to be stored. And that's what a plant uses for growth and to reproduce. Without photosynthesis, a plant is not going to grow. And photosynthesis cannot occur unless there's light. So in our houses, most of the time we put our plants close to the windows because that's where light comes in. You also in a house can use artificial light, and light is measured in two ways: by light quality and light quantity. So light quality or light quality is the intensity of the light. It's the amount of light reaching a plant. It's determined by the brightest of the light and the distance between the light and the plant. The other is light duration. So how long does the plant get light? So spaces near windows are the logical places to put plants. Large windows let in lots of light. I'm gonna have to quit hitting the mouse pad. One of the things you need to do is to know the orientation of your window. Light that comes in, okay, the southern exposure is the best exposure for houseplants. It gives the strongest light, and you would use this for plants that need high light or lots of light, like your tropical plants. East facing windows used for low to moderate light, which is what most houseplants need. West facing windows can be useful for plants that require high amounts of light and warmer conditions. But now west facing windows would be afternoon sun, so you want to be careful. North facing windows provide enough light to grow low light plants in the summer, but not in the winter. So another thing you have to realize is that the further away a plant is from the window, the less light it's going to get. An interesting thing also is the color of the walls in your house. Your light colored walls will reflect light back to your plants, and your darker colored walls, the light is absorbed by the walls and the plants won't get enough light. So as a result, they're going to start being leggy, which means that the stems extend trying to get the leaves to where they can absorb light. You need to be real careful about moving your plants around, especially when you're moving them outdoor in the spring or back into the house during the fall, because plants, it traumatizes plants and they have to have a period of adjustment. A drastic change from low light to bright light, the leaves may wither, and it usually needs 2 to 4 weeks to adjust to that. And if the leaves are scorched during the sun, their plants are seldom going to recover from that trauma. Another thing about light that you need to be aware of is that plants get dust on them just like every other thing in your house. And the simplest way to improve the appearance of your plants is to keep them clean. One of the things that you should not do is to use that spray that some florists use to make the leaves real shiny, because that's a waxy spray, and what that does is that closes up the pores on top of your leaves and underneath your leaves. So the plant can't can't bring in carbon dioxide and let off oxygen. So there are some things that you can do. You generally can just use a damp paper towel. If the leaves are like the leaves on this plant here that we're looking at, large leaves, smooth leaves. You also, for smaller fine leaf plants, you can just spray them, put them in the sink and spray them. But one of the things that you want to be aware of is that sometimes the spray is really, really hard. And when you spray the plant, it damages the plant. So you want to use a gentle spray. You also sometimes can put them inside the shower and use a soft spray. If you have a plant like an African violet that has hairs on the leaves, what you can do to clean that is to use a small paintbrush and just brush the leaves off. Sometimes when you do this, you want the leaves to dry quickly so they don't get spots on them. So you want to put them either where they can get some light and dry, or there's air circulating that will dry them. A, and our plant word is for air. If you look at the underside of a leaf in a microscope, the underside of the leaf has all these little tiny openings that are called stomata. They look like a pair of lips, and they function just like the lips do. Because when the leaf wants to retain water and not let water out, those openings close. Those two little cells right here close, and then the water can't get out. But if it wants to let out oxygen or pull in carbon dioxide, that opens up and air can go in and out. Now, logically, this is how you get your materials for photosynthesis. So it's important. N is for nutrients. Just like we need food, plants need nutrients in order to grow. One of the things that most people do is to feed their plants. And there are some general rules of thumb that you want to observe. You actually want to fertilize them or feed them when they're actively producing new growth. And usually that's in the spring and the fall. During the winter, they normally aren't growing very much, so they don't really need to be fed during the winter. One of the things you want to do is to feed your plants when the soil is moist. If you feed a plant and the soil is dry, then what happens is the plant picks up a lot more nutrients than it really needs, and it will burn the plant. So if you have your soil moist, that allows for normal pickup of the nutrients. If you've just purchased a plant, you really don't want to fertilize it or feed it. Or if you've moved a plant from one place to another, that's another time you don't want to feed it. Also, if you repot a plant, don't feed it for at least 6 weeks, especially if the soil has fertilizer in it. Now, this picture is just for illustration. It is not an endorsement of any of these products. We are not allowed to do that as master gardeners. So, one of the things that you need to be aware of when you buy your plant food is the numbers on the bag or the numbers on the pot. They're usually 3 numbers like this: 10, 30, 20. The first number is the number for the amount of nitrogen that's in the plant food. There are analyses done that give the food the amount of that particular nutrient. And what nitrogen does for a plant is it supports growth, new stems, new leaves. The second number that you'll see is phosphorus. Phosphorus is usually a bloom starter. It allows the plant to set buds and to produce flowers. And then the last number is potassium. Potassium allows the roots to collect moisture and nutrients and move them through the plant. So for houseplants, unless you're specifically doing it for a specific plant like African violets or cactus or bromeliads or something like this, you want to use a general food. You want your numbers to be almost the same, like 10, 10, 10 or 20, 20, 20. Most plants will grow best when they're balanced. Okay. Also, a plant needs micronutrients, which are present in the soil. That's things like copper, calcium, iron, but they don't need a whole lot of them. And if you buy magnesium, if you buy a good potting soil, then those micronutrients are in that soil. Now, let's see if you're awake. What's happened to those plants? Any ideas? They weren't overfed. What actually happened to them was they were all watered to death. So overwatering is probably the biggest reason that houseplants die. And so we're going to talk a little bit about T is for thirsty. When you water plants, how do you know when you need to water them? I'm going back to this other slide. How do you know when you need to water them? There are generally 3 tests that you can do. One is called the knuckle test. In the knuckle test, you put your finger down into the soil up to your first knuckle. If the soil feels damp at the bottom of your tip of your finger, you probably do not need to water. This probably has enough dampness there for the roots. Another method is to tip the pot. If you pick it up or tilt it and it's light, then it probably does need to be watered, because a pot that has enough water in it will be a lot heavier than a dry pot. You also can buy meters that will tell you the amount of moisture in the soil. I meant to look it up and see how much they are. I don't know, but you do have to pay something for them, and they're sometimes not real reliable. So there is some guesswork involved in watering your plants, because you don't know how much water is retained down around the roots or in the center of the pot. But if you pay attention to the plant, it will tell you. If the plant droops, it might need water, but if you do the test, you might have overwatered it also, because plants droop both from overwatering and underwatering. When you water your plant, water it from the top and also from the bottom. And you let it drink for 30 minutes. Don't let it sit. If you water it and the water runs out the bottom, don't let it sit for more than 30 minutes, because that way it gets waterlogged. You've overwatered it. So it's good to water them from both the top and the bottom. And you need to give the plant the same kind of water you like to drink. If you have plants generally like soft water a lot better than hard water. One of the things you need to be aware of also is that plants do not like chlorine. So in our treated water that we have, there are chemicals that are left in the water that comes out of the tap. You probably should let it sit overnight, let the water sit overnight, so that chlorine gas evaporates into the air I, this is one of those things where do as I say and not as I do. I had not been doing that. And the tips of the leaves of my plants were getting brown, even though I was watering at a regular, on a regular basis. And I asked Jordan Franklin, who's our horticulture agent, our extension agent, could it be the water? And he said, yes, that's what the chemicals do to the plants. So I had a friend who taught at the same school I did, and what she did was she filled up milk jugs, used milk jugs with water, and just left them sitting until she was ready to water the plants. I don't do that. I have 2 pitchers that I leave sitting out overnight now, and then I water. Another thing about water is that it should be room temperature. Think about what happens when you get into the shower and the water is not on the right temperature. If the water's cold, you just kind of draw up. And the same thing happens to plants. If you water plants with cold water, it chills the roots and it'll cause root rot, which is what this next slide shows. From healthy roots to root rot and a dead plant. Most root rot is caused by bacteria or fungi, and overwatering contributes to that because it provides a really, really damp place for fungi to grow. It's usually futile to try to save a plant that has root rot. About the only thing you can do is to propagate a healthy leaf or stem from the plant if you want to keep it. If you go back to what Corey said, if you overwater, just throw it away. Put it out in the compost pile. So there is some watering lingo that appears on the tags that come with the plants. Lightly moist. The soil should never really dry out. It should be consistently damp. Now, I don't know how you do that because you'd have to water every 2 or 3 days. So I don't know how you do it. Moderately moist. The soil should be amply moist, but not overwatered. What I generally do with my plants is to water them once and let the water run out, and then come back and water them again a little bit. Because sometimes the potting soil does not get moist down in the middle of the pot. So if you water them twice, then the soil is consistently damp. And most house plants do moderately moist. Allow to dry out. This is the peace plant. It's an example of this. The soil should be allowed to dry out completely, and then not a lot of water used, like a cactus. So the pots that you use for your plants have a lot to do with drainage and watering. All pots need to have a drainage hole in them. If you have a large drainage hole, it's better to put some smaller drainage holes around that larger one. One is good, one is okay, but more is better. You really don't want to have a plant in a pot that does not have a drainage hole. There is a way that you can do this. You can double pot or use what is called a cache pot. You can put a plastic pot inside a pot that doesn't have a hole in it. And sometimes it's a good idea to put a little layer of rocks there, and don't let the water sit on those rocks because that will cause overwatering. If your pot doesn't have a hole in it and you want to put a hole in it, you can do that with a drill and a masonry bit. Don't just use any kind of bit. It needs to be a masonry bit. And when you do this, do it with a slower speed and even pressure, and then you won't break the pot. Sometimes people put wire or something across the bottom of the hole to keep the soil in. That is really not a good idea to use wire, because then the roots cannot get out of the bottom of the hole to let you know that it needs to be repotted. A better idea would be to use a layer of small rock. Again, don't make it too much, because water tends to pool in these rocks and it would cause overwatering. I use a coffee filter in mine. Gradually it will deteriorate and the plant can get through the bottom, but it does hold the soil in the pot. S is for soil. Potting soil has little, if any, soil in it. You really do not want to go outside and dig soil from the ground and you put your houseplant in it. There's a reason for that, because soil in the ground is a living entity. It has bacteria, fungi, mycorrhizoids, earthworms. It's kind of a living entity, and it flows in and flows out of the soil. Well, in a pot, that doesn't happen. So if you use that soil, there's no soil from the ground, there's no way to keep that soil live and vibrant. But potting soil is usually made up of peat moss, composted bark, sand or perlite, and it may have particles of vermiculite in it. There are recipes that you can make your own potting soil if you want to. I find that if you don't buy the cheapest thing on the market, but you spend a little bit more money for a good potting soil, it's better for your plants. If you will private message me, I'll give you the one that I use, which is absolutely wonderful. Usually in potting soil, it has been kilned so that it kills all the bad bacteria and fungi, and it's sterile. So another thing is, don't buy more than you're going to use in a couple months, because if you buy a bag of potting soil and leave the top open, then stuff is going to get into that soil and it's not going to be good for your plants. So I've told you what all to do with your plants. I'm going to suggest 6 plants that are good house plants for beginners. Pothos and philodendron. Both of these are very low light requiring plants. There is a difference. It's like they're cousins with one another. The pothos has larger, thicker, waxier leaves, and the philodendron's leaves are heart-shaped here. They belong to different genuses, belong to the same family, but different genuses. So they're like cousins. The pothos is one of NASA's air purifying plants. It also is more drought tolerant than the philodendron, but they both can go long times without being watered. They generally just kind of wilt a little bit if they need water. The easiest way to tell them apart is by the leaves. Also, if you're really into telling them apart, where the leaves attach to the stem and the philodendron, it's curved and looks like a heart. In the pothos, it's straight and attaches right to the stem. The pothos is also called devil's ivy, as the common name for it. Two more plants for beginners. Oh, let me also say back here, pothos needs to be, they like to be pot bound. They don't put them in a big pot because they like their roots to be really tight together. The peace lily, this is a 4-star NASA plant. This is probably the best air cleaning plant that you can have in your house. The flowers are very striking. They generally have a flowering cycle in the summer, so they're not going to have flowers in the winter. If you get them for a present, when the flowers die, cut them off, and it will recycle and bloom again in the summer. They don't like really, really bright light. Moderate light in an east-facing window would be good. Keep the leaves clean so that there's not a lot of dust on them. It's a striking plant. Some people feel that this plant is kind of finicky. I personally don't like to water. So my peace lily, the leaves have been all the way wilted over the side of the pot, and I water it and it just comes right back up. But that does stress the plant out. So Dracaena, this is a corn plant, grows to be about 6 feet, can grow to be 6 feet. If you want it smaller, just lop the top of it off right here, just lop the top off. And within weeks, it'll produce more leaflets and stems. Generally, it will turn, if it turns yellow, then you've overwatered it. This is another one that has big leaves, so you need to keep the leaves clean with a damp cloth. If the leaves droop or turn yellow, you probably have overwatered it. And if there are brown spots on the leaves, then it's getting too much sun. Plants can get sunburned just like we can. Sansevieria is another one that is a 3-star NASA plant. Snake plant, mother-in-law's tongue. This plant is supposed to be indestructible. You have to really work at trying to kill this plant, supposedly. I have done that, but I think what happened was it got too much water. But it really tolerates neglect. It has thick leaves that generally have yellow or white borders on them. And snake-like, they're tall. So it's a good plant for beginners. Aloe vera is a plant that every house needs to have because it's called the burn plant or the medicine plant. If you are burned, like if you burn yourself cooking, you can cut off one of these leaflets, and the sap is helps with that burn or with skin problems. It likes lightly moist soil. It doesn't like really, really bright light. And if you put it outside in the summer, do so gradually, it can get sunburned very easily if you put it in too bright of a light. So, as a review, if you meet these needs for the plant, then you're on your way to becoming a green thumb. So, are there any questions?
Yes, we've got some questions already. First one is, you know how you mentioned leaving out pitchers of water to dechlorinate them. Do the pitchers need to be uncovered?
Yes,
Great.
I just fill them up and leave them sitting on the counter one night and then water the next day. The same thing would be true of your water if you use gallon jugs, used gallon jugs, just leave the top off of them so that the gas can escape.
Great. Okay, we've got another question. What is the best way to prepare plants to come back indoors for the winter?
Well, if you read the books, what they tell you to do is don't do it all at one time. In other words, don't wait till the frost is coming like last night when it's going to be 32 degrees and then bring them inside. You bring them inside when it's cold at night and you put them back out at night in the daytime and do it gradually until you just can leave them inside. I don't do that. I brought my plants in last night because it was going to get really cold, and they may just it's going to take an adjustment period. It takes an adjustment period. So, but supposedly you're supposed to do it a little bit at a time. You know, leave them out when it's warmer, bring them in when it's colder.
Okay.
That's a lot of work if you have a lot of plants.
Yeah. And then the last question we have so far is, what do you want in potting soil?
You don't necessarily have to have fertilizer because you can feed your plant potting soil with fertilizer in it because you can feed your plant later. Composted bark, peat moss, perlite, vermiculite. It needs to be light and fluffy. It doesn't need to compact and be real heavy soil. In some potting soils that you pick up, the bags are just really, really heavy. That's it. It needs to be light and fluffy. And I don't know how to describe it. Mine has pieces of bark in it, but the bark has been decayed, and so it's dark. Good potting soil has a dark color to it.
Okay.
And it doesn't smell. And good potting soil doesn't smell.
Great. And then the next question is, how much do you want to water in the winter?
The only thing I can say is watch your plants. If you know how much water your plants need, you can't just say, all right, I'm going to water every other week, because some plants need more water, some plants need less. But you just have to watch your plants, and when they start kind of looking a little wilted, water them or do the knuckle test. The plants do not need as much water during the winter. However, that being said, sometimes the dry environment in our homes and the low humidity in our houses, if it's hot and the air is moving, you have a fan on or something like that, it dries the plant out. So it would need more moisture. So it's, as I said, you just have to know your plants. They have to almost be personal friends.
And then we've got a question, kind of applies to a couple that are asking about pests and gnats. One person asks, when you're bringing plants from outdoors into the inside, do you recommend spraying the leaves and soil with diluted hydrogen peroxide or alcohol to help kill any of the pests?
I've never heard that. I have read that. Okay. I have read that you really need to shake them off, and if it's warm, you can spray them off with water spray and let them dry and then bring them in. I'm a science teacher, so bugs don't bother me. So I just wipe my pots off and bring them in, you know. So I really don't know the answer to that. I would not do that, but that doesn't mean that somebody else might not suggest that. You need to look at them really good and make sure you don't have spider webs and that kind of stuff and things living underneath the leaves. So I would not spray mine with peroxide or alcohol.
Well, if you do get a gnat infestation, what do you do to handle gnats on your houseplants?
I've never had a gnat infestation. I would say gnats probably might be the environment. Maybe repot it. Maybe it's from the soil, and the soil has the microorganisms in it that are causing the gnats to be produced. So I think maybe what I would do is just repot it, take it out and repot it and see if that gets rid of it.
Okay.
But that's just a educated guess. I have never had gnats. So
You're lucky.
I also didn't mention any flowering plants. Most of the plants I mentioned were foliage plants. About the only flowering plant inside I know about is the holiday cactuses, the Thanksgiving cactus, the Easter cactus that flower at certain times. So.
Okay. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry, my mouse pad was really sensitive.
Oh, no, it's totally fine. And thank you to everyone who joined us for Houseplants 101. Be sure to register for the next live Master Gardener virtual event. That's Thursday, December 3rd, this same time, 6 p.m. And that's about pollinators in jeopardy. And of course, check out our calendar and virtual classes page for more content in the meantime. And if you haven't already, you can still request a microgreens kit from our Adults of Virtual Activities page and go ahead and start growing some microgreens at home. And finally, if you want another great tip on sustainability and gardening, be sure to use your library card. Your library card is your ticket to so many free resources, databases, downloadables, streaming, not to mention physical resources like books and DVDs. So don't forget to also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for library updates and sign up for our e-newsletter. Thank you all for your time, and we look forward to seeing you soon at our next live virtual event. Thanks for coming. Bye, everyone.